Serafina had learned long ago that silence was a skill, not the kind that came from having nothing to say, but the kind that came from knowing exactly how much danger lived in the wrong word at the wrong moment. She stood at the edge of the river that ran behind their small stone cottage, watching her 3 children play in the shallow water. Kale was chasing a frog with more determination than strategy. Lyra had already caught 2, and was examining them with the calm focus of someone twice her age. Rowan had fallen asleep on the grassy bank, one small hand still curled around a smooth river stone he had refused to put down since breakfast. They were 4 years old. They were her whole world, and they were the most dangerous secret she had ever kept. She counted the trees out of habit. She noted the direction of the wind. She listened past the children's laughter for sounds that did not belong: snapping branches, the heavy rhythm of boots, the low frequency that large wolves carried in their footsteps without knowing it. Nothing, just the river, just her children, she breathed. She had not always lived like this, measuring every day against the possibility of being found. Once, she had been simply Serafina Voss, a field medic with quick hands and a quiet reputation, attached to a small diplomatic envoy traveling from the neutral territories into the heart of Ashvale. She had been 22. She had believed, in that way that young people believe things before the world teaches them otherwise, that careful behavior was enough protection. Then she had walked into the wrong corridor on the wrong evening and found herself standing in the private war chamber of Alpha King Zalen Mordecai. She had expected to be removed, possibly arrested. She had prepared a formal apology in her head that she never had the chance to deliver, because Zalen had simply looked at her, silver eyes moving over her face with the focused attention of someone reading a document, and said, quietly, "You'll stay." She had stayed. For 3 months, she had stayed. She had told herself many things during those months: that she was being practical, that leaving before the diplomatic mission concluded would cause problems for the envoy, that the Alpha King's interest in her was a political calculation she had not yet decoded. She had told herself almost everything except the truth, which was that, for the first time in her life, she had felt entirely seen by another person, and it frightened her far more than his power did. He had not been what she expected. Behind the cold authority he wore in public, there was a man who read history for pleasure, who argued with his generals with his hands rather than his voice, who stood at the palace window some evenings, long after the candles were lit, looking at something only he could see. She had watched him, in those months, the way you watch something you cannot afford to want, carefully, from a distance, already grieving. And then she had found the letter. She had not been searching. She had gone to the Beta's administrative quarters to deliver a medical report. Draven, the Beta, who smiled at her pleasantly, and had always made the back of her neck tighten in a way she could not explain. The letter had been sitting open on his desk. She had read the first 2 lines before she understood what it was. The language was formal, almost gentle. It spoke of biological complications and unapproved succession claims, and the necessity of quiet resolution before attachment becomes a structural problem. At the bottom, in Draven's neat handwriting, was a date and her name. 2 weeks away. Serafina had set the medical report down on the desk beside the letter, smoothed it flat with her palm, and walked back to her room. She had not run. Running would have been noticed. She had packed only what she could carry. She had left before dawn. She had not known yet that she was pregnant. She found out 6 weeks later, alone in a rented room in the border village of Cray's Mill, when she was already too far into the neutral territories to go back, and had already decided, regardless, that she would not. The Thornmere borderlands were not a kind place to build a life. They were not unkind either. They were simply indifferent, a wide belt of forest and village and river that existed between territories, governed by no one and protected by no one, which meant that the people who lived there had learned to protect themselves and each other. Serafina had found her cottage through a woman named Bet, who asked no questions and expected the same courtesy in return. She had built her practice slowly, tending wounds, delivering children, mixing remedies, and earned enough to keep her family fed and warm, and, most importantly, unnoticed. She had raised 3 children in that cottage. She had taught them to be careful before she taught them to be curious. She had told them, in terms they could understand at 3, and then 4, that their family was special and private and not for sharing with strangers. She had not told them about their father. She did not know how to begin. It was Cale who spotted the merchant's wagon first, on a Tuesday morning in early autumn. "Mama, he has good apples," Cale announced, already walking toward the market road with the complete confidence of a child who has never been told no effectively. Serafina followed her children into the village with her basket over one arm, and her senses quietly wide open, the way they always were in public. The autumn market was lively, farmers with root vegetables, a woman selling dyed wool, 2 older men arguing cheerfully over a game board in the corner. The merchant with the apples was talkative. He came from the Eastern Passage, he said, and trade had been interesting this season, with the Asheville units moving through the neutral zones again, a new wave, more organized than the last. Serafina picked up an apple and turned it over in her hands. "Moving through for what purpose?" she asked, in the mild tone she used for questions she needed answered, without seeming to need them. The merchant shrugged. "Expansion, people say, or some long political business the Alpha King won't let go of," he laughed. "Rich men and their complications, yes?" Serafina paid for her apples. She thanked him pleasantly. She walked her children home in a calm and unhurried way. That evening, she checked the go-bags she kept beneath the floorboards. Water, dried food, warm layers, identification papers with different names that a sympathetic forger had made for her 3 years ago, when she had decided that optimism was not a survival strategy. Everything was in order. She closed the floorboards and sat on the edge of Rowan's bed while he slept, her hand resting lightly on his back, feeling him breathe. She had not planned to take them to the village again so soon, but Rowan developed a fever 4 days later, the kind that crept up quietly and then sat heavy, and she needed dried bitterroot from the apothecary that she had run out of. She wrapped him carefully and left the older 2 with Bet, and she went. She was examining the bitterroot selection when she felt it. It was a pressure in the air, specific and unmistakable, the kind that preceded a very old, very powerful wolf. She had felt it only once before in her life, in a palace corridor, the evening before her world had divided into before and after. She did not turn around immediately. She set the bitterroot down. She picked up a different bundle. She let her lungs do one full, even breath. Then she turned. He was standing at the far end of the market road. Zaylen Mordecai looked exactly as she remembered him, and entirely different, the way places look different when you return to them after years, the same, and marked by time in ways you can only see because you knew what they were before. He was still tall, still dark-haired, still carrying that particular quality of stillness that powerful people carry, the stillness of someone who does not need to move to command a room. He was looking at her. She walked to the nearest stall and picked up a bundle of dried herbs she did not need, and began examining them with great care. She heard his footsteps on the road, unhurried, certain. Serafina. Her name in his voice, after 5 years, was a more difficult thing than she had prepared for. She kept her eyes on the herbs. "You're far from Asheville," she said. "I am," he agreed. He stopped beside her, close enough to speak quietly, far enough to be, technically, appropriate. "So are you. I live here. I know." She looked up at that. He met her eyes, and for a moment, neither of them said anything, because there was too much to say, and no map for how to say it. "Are you well?" he asked. "Yes." "Are you alone?" She opened her mouth, and from the alley behind her, a child's voice rang out, high, bright, and indignant. "Mama, Rowan took my herb bundle, and he's putting it in his mouth again." Serafina closed her eyes for one breath. When she opened them, Zaylen was looking past her, at the alley entrance, at the small boy standing there with dark hair and silver eyes, and an expression of complete moral outrage directed at his invisible sibling. The market noise continued around them. Somewhere a woman laughed. A dog barked twice. Serafina and Zaylen stood still, in the middle of all of it. She did not explain. She turned and collected Cale from the alley entrance, found Lyra 2 steps behind him, and reached for Rowan, who was still wrapped against her side and blinking sleepily at the unfamiliar face that his mother was standing very still in front of. She turned back to Zaylen and let him look. He looked for a long time. He looked at Cale's silver eyes, At Lyra's sharp, watchful expression. At Rowan's round, warm face. His own face did something she had no name for. Something that moved through him like weather. Visible, and then controlled. "How long?" he asked. "They are 4, she said. He understood the math. He nodded, slowly, and looked at her. "Tell me," he said. "All of it. Tell me why." She told him everything. She told him about the letter, about her name written at the bottom in Draven's handwriting, about the 2-week date, and what she had understood it to mean. She told him in the same flat, clear voice she used for medical reports, because it was the only way she could say it without coming apart. Zaylin listened without interrupting. His face was very still. His eyes were not. When she finished, he said nothing for a long moment. Then, Draven. Just the name. Spoken quietly, in the way very still water looks calm directly before it moves. She watched his face, and understood something that rearranged 5 years of her life. He had not known. Whatever Draven had decided to do, he had done it without the king's knowledge. She had run from a threat that Zaylin had not placed there. She had built her entire hidden life around a decision someone else had made without his permission. She did not know how to feel about that. She was not sure she had the room, yet, to feel it at all. The days that followed were not simple. Nothing between them could be simple. But Zaylin stayed in the borderlands, not in the cottage, which was hers and remained hers, but in the village, where he was noticed and discussed with great enthusiasm by absolutely everyone. Draven came when summoned. He confessed fully, and without theater, a man doing the only honest thing left available to him. He had acted, he said, on what he believed was best for the throne. He had not anticipated that the king would search for 5 years. He had not understood what Seraphina was to him. Zaylin stripped him of his title before the council that had traveled with him. He did not exile him. He offered him a choice, which was, Seraphina privately thought, a more complicated mercy than she would have managed. The triplets, during all of this, were largely unaware of the significance of events and entirely focused on investigating their father with the thoroughness of small scientists. Triplets to Zaylin, on their second meeting, that his horse was sad and needed a different kind of brush. Lyra corrected his pronunciation of a word in Old Tongue with the polite firmness of someone who could not let an error stand. Rowan simply climbed onto his knee one afternoon, pressed his small ear to Zaylin's chest, and fell asleep there, which was the moment Seraphina had to excuse herself and stand outside in the cool air for a while. On the evening before decisions needed to be made, Zaylin found her on the ridge above the village, where the tree line opened, and you could see both the Thornmere forest stretching south and the distant edge of Ashvale's territory to the north. She had come here sometimes, in the years alone, when the cottage felt too small to contain everything she was carrying. He stood beside her and looked at the same horizon. "I came to your room," he said, eventually, "the night before you disappeared. I had something to say." She waited. I had no language for it. I had built everything in myself around leading, around the throne, around what the position required. And then you were there, and the architecture stopped making sense. He paused. "I came to your room to tell you that I did not know what to do with that. And that I intended to find out, if you were willing." The wind moved through the trees below them. "You've spent 5 years surviving something you should never have had to survive," he continued. "You built a home from nothing, in difficult land, for 3 children, alone. I am not asking you to undo that. I am not asking you to come to Ashvale and be a queen, or a symbol, or a political solution." He looked at her then, and his voice was quieter. "I am asking whether there is any room, in the life you have built, for me to be present in it, as their father, as someone who would like, if you will permit it over time, to earn your trust." Seraphina looked at the horizon for a long time. "I am not the same person who left," she said. "I know. I will need time." "I have been searching for 5 years," he said. "I have time." She almost smiled. It surprised her. "You will have to be patient," she said. "I mean that genuinely. I understand. And the children make their own choices about you. I will not instruct them to feel something they don't feel." "I would not want that," he said. She nodded slowly. The wind was cool and steady. Below them, through the cottage window, she could see the warm flicker of the lamp she had left burning. Then we begin there, she said. Carefully. Carefully, he agreed. That night, she sat on the edge of Rowan's bed and listened to all three of them breathe in the darkness. Cale was curled on his side with one arm stretched across to Lyra's cot, as he always slept. Lyra was on her back, perfectly still, face composed even in sleep. Rowan had his stone in his hand again. Seraphina sat with them in the quiet for a long time. Then she stood, and she did not check the tree line. She did not count the exits. She simply blew out the lamp, and she breathed, and for the first time in 4 years the breathing came easy, slow, and full, and unhurried, like a woman who has carried something heavy for a very long time, and has only just set it down. Outside the cottage door, everything was still. The forest was quiet, the stars were clear. She had run to survive, she had hidden to protect, she had built something real and strong and entirely her own, out of nothing but necessity and love. And now, for the first time, she did not have to figure out what came next, entirely alone. It was not an ending, it was not simple, it was the careful, difficult, honest beginning of something she did not yet have a name for. But she was not afraid of it. That, she decided, was enough to start.